If you've ever dabbled in stellar evolution, you probably know that when the sun eventually dies, its core will collapse into a white dwarf, squeezing about half of its mass down to the size of Earth. But to form a black hole, the sun would have to squeeze its entire mass all the way down to the size of downtown Baltimore. At just one solar mass, the sun literally doesn't have what it takes to squeeze itself that small. But what if the sun already has a black hole hiding in its core, devouring it from the inside out? Could we even detect it before it's too late? For most people, the phrase black hole sun is the name of the 90s grunge anthem by Soundgarden and not an entry on your Death by the Universe bingo card. But the idea isn't new. Stephen Hawking proposed black holes hiding in stars, including the sun, way back in 1971. It seems like a strange idea, considering black holes are supposed to form in the collapse of giant stars and weigh several times the sun's mass. If one of those snuck inside the sun, I think we'd have noticed by now. But Hawking was considering a different kind of black hole, one that formed in the dense inferno in the first moments after the Big Bang. At that time, the universe was so small that sufficiently overdense regions could have collapsed directly into black holes. These so-called primordial black holes, or PBHs, could weigh as little as 100 billionth of a kilogram, all the way up to thousands of solar masses. Hawking suggested that perhaps a PBH hiding inside the sun's core could explain the lack of observed neutrinos coming from the sun. Neutrinos are a byproduct of nuclear fusion, and we can detect them here on Earth. However, we could only detect about 1/3 of the expected number of solar neutrinos, and that left astrophysicists wondering if maybe the sun had an additional, non-fusing source of energy. Hawking suggested that a small black hole might be able to fill that role. That might seem really strange, considering that black holes aren't supposed to be a source of anything, let alone energy. But matter falling into a black hole is moving at nearly the speed of light, crashing into itself and producing a tremendous amount of energy in the process. This is how supermassive black holes feeding in galaxies turn them into quasars, which are the brightest objects in the universe. In Hawking's scenario, a small black hole in the sun's core would feed on some of the matter, but turn much more of it into pure energy. So the rest of the sun's core wouldn't have to make as much energy by fusing hydrogen, and therefore wouldn't be producing as many neutrinos. It was an interesting idea, but nobody, including Hawking, took it seriously. And that's because most people thought it was just that we didn't understand something about neutrinos. It would take another 30 years, but eventually we'd learn that neutrinos oscillate between 3 different flavors, and our detectors are only sensitive to one of them. With the sun's neutrinos accounted for, Hawking's black hole was no longer needed. But the idea of primordial black holes never completely went away either. That's because there's a chance they could be dark matter. Observations have managed to rule out large PBHs with the masses of planets and higher, and PBHs that are too small would have evaporated by now due to Hawking radiation. But that leaves a range between 10 to the 14 to 10 to the 20 kilograms, or that of a medium to large asteroid, that haven't been ruled out yet because their individual gravitational effects would be too weak for us to detect. If PBHs within this mass range exist in the numbers needed to account for dark matter, then sure, maybe some of them could have ended up in stars, like our sun, for example. But how would a black hole, primordial or otherwise, get into the sun in the first place? The odds of the sun just capturing one by chance are very low. A small PBH falling into the sun from a great distance would be moving so fast it would pass right through the sun and emerge on the other side, never to return. On the other hand, if the black hole found itself inside of a star-forming cloud, it has a pretty good chance of sneaking into the star. So, what if that star just happened to be our sun? How would the black hole affect the sun's evolution, and when? A team of astronomers investigated those very questions. Their results were published in a pair of papers in the Astrophysical Journal. The first was led by Dr. Earl Bellinger, and the second by Dr. Matt Kaplan. Fittingly, the team dubbed these black hole-bearing stars Hawking stars. Both papers ran detailed simulations to see what happens to sun-like stars that start out with and without primordial black holes, and follow their evolution from there. Let's first consider how their model evolves the standard normal sun. We can visualize the sun's evolution on the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. It plots increasing luminosity versus decreasing surface temperature. The diagonal dashed lines represent the sun's radius. The dot marked ZAMS is where the sun started out 4.6 billion years ago. Since then, the sun has gotten a little brighter and a little hotter, moving to the circled position here. But in a few billion years from now, the core will exhaust its hydrogen fuel. The outer layers will expand and cool, and the sun becomes a red giant. Eventually, the sun will bloat out to hundreds of solar radii. That would make it large enough to engulf Mercury, Venus, and possibly Earth. The sun will lose its outer layers, and its core will have collapsed into an ultra-dense white dwarf about the size of Earth. So far, so good. But what happens when the black hole is added? We're going to find out shortly, but first I'd like to take a moment to thank Aura for sponsoring today's video, because I've had it with the number of unwanted spam robocalls I was getting last year. You may have had the same problem yourself to the point where you don't even want to answer the phone anymore. But those unwanted calls are a symptom of a much deeper problem. Data brokers are making a fortune selling your information to robocallers, spammers, and others who want to learn more about you, like where you live. You can contact those data brokers and tell them to remove your data, and they would be legally required to do so. But they don't have to make it easy for you to make that request either. Oh, and good luck when your information is stolen and distributed on the dark web. Well, the good news is that Aura can identify data brokers exposing your info and submit opt-out requests on your behalf, and keep at it until your data is removed. But Aura does much more to protect you and your family from online threats you cannot see. And it's really easy to set up, so you don't have to download several different apps to get things like parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. I'm so happy to use Aura to help keep me and my family safe, and I think you will too. And that's why Aura is giving viewers a 2-week trial of their award-winning service absolutely free. I invite you to give Aura a try because, hey, you can either let people continue to exploit and profit off your private information, or you can just go to aura.com/launchpad and start your 2-week free trial. Let Aura do the work of keeping you safe online so you can focus on other tasks with peace of mind, such as black holes swallowing the sun. We've seen how the research team's model describes the expected behavior and evolution of the sun as we currently understand it. Now let's see what happens when a primordial black hole is thrown in. For the first few billion years, everything is virtually the same as it was without a black hole. But this time, that tiny black hole is slowly accreting. Any matter within a certain distance of the black hole finds itself being drawn towards it, creating a region where matter isn't fusing. This region is called the Bondi sphere. Matter within the Bondi sphere isn't producing energy by fusion, but rather by friction as it crashes into itself around the black hole. This disrupts the very center of the core and causes the surrounding material to churn like a bubbling cauldron. The inner region of the core has now become convective. Convection is going to become important later on, and here's why. The core is hot enough to fuse hydrogen into helium, but not hot enough to fuse helium into anything heavier. That allows the rest of the core to keep fusing away unimpeded. But when convection is introduced, those helium nuclei are churned back up into the surrounding plasma. It doesn't kill fusion outright, but it does have the effect of slowing down the rate of fusion by a tiny amount. Now, for most of the sun's life, the convection is confined to the very, very center of the core, so there's no significant slowdown in the sun's energy output. For example, by the time the sun reaches its current age, the black hole has grown to the same mass as planet Mercury. It's a lot bigger than when it started out, but it's still tiny, less than 1/10 of a millimeter in radius. The Bondi sphere has grown larger as well, but it's only a few centimeters across. The convective region is now extending further out into the core, but this region is also no larger than Earth. As far as the sun's concerned, everything is just business as usual. Still, it's kind of weird to think that right now the sun could have a black hole as massive as Mercury, and we wouldn't have any clue it was there. But as the black hole continues to grow, it exerts an ever stronger gravitational pull on its surroundings. It's also getting physically larger, so more matter can fall into the widening hole. The amount of radiation produced by accretion is also increasing, which means the convective bubble is expanding further out into the fusing core. In the normal case, the core contracts as helium accumulates in the center, but convection from the black hole is having the opposite effect. It's actually expanding the core, pushing the fusion zone further away from the center. After 5.5 billion years, the black hole has grown to a few hundred thousandths of the sun's mass and is producing about 20% of the sun's luminosity. The convection zone has grown so large that fusion in the core starts to rapidly drop off. The sun is evolving backward on the HR diagram, growing dimmer and cooler. It won't last. The black hole soon reaches a mass of 1/10,000th the sun's. That's like compressing the planet Uranus into a 10-centimeter ball. Although the black hole is no larger than a grapefruit, its convective bubble has expanded to fill the entire star. The core is gone, having been pushed outward into the upper layers where fusion dies. The sun is now running on 100% black hole power. As the black hole continues to grow, the increasing radiation inflates the outer layers. The sun begins expanding into a red giant billions of years early. But this expansion is short-lived. With less material in the interior, the black hole's growth levels off, as does its radiation output. The sun's expansion is arrested at about 4 to 5 times its current radius. Instead of engulfing Mercury, Venus, and Earth, the Hawking sun can't even reach Mercury's orbit. Of course, it will still shine about 10 times brighter than it does today, which is more than enough to boil off the oceans and render Earth into a burnt crisp far sooner than expected, so incineration by red giants still remains on your bingo card. The not-a-giant sun spends the next several billion years in a relatively vacant place on the HR diagram as a sub-subgiant. Maybe later it grows into a red straggler. Exactly what happens next depends on just how the black hole continues to accrete and whether or not photons can radiate away from the accretion or if they end up getting trapped in orbit around the black hole. But the end result is the same. The black hole consumes the sun from the inside out. That's no surprise. It's a growing black hole for crying out loud. But what is surprising is just how long-lived the Hawking sun would be, even with a variety of initial black hole masses. So far, we've looked at a black hole with an initial mass of 100 billionth the sun's and let it grow from there. But if the sun started out with a trillionth solar mass black hole, you wouldn't notice until the sun has already left the main sequence. It's only when you start modeling black holes that start out with the masses of dwarf planets that you can get the sun to evolve earlier than its present age. All that said, nobody, not even the authors, think the sun actually contains a black hole. But if evolved Hawking stars exist, we may have a shot of finding them. Sound waves oscillating in the star cause it to vibrate with a regular cadence, kind of like a drum. Those vibrations cause the star to flicker slightly in a regular pattern. We can use asteroseismology to deconstruct this flickering to understand the star's interior. Asteroseismology can't probe all the way to the star's core, but it can reveal where the convective upper layer ends and where the interior radiative layer begins. On the other hand, an evolving Hawking star would be entirely convective, and that should leave it with a much simpler oscillation mode that asteroseismology could detect. ESA's Gaia satellite has spotted about 500 red stragglers. When its asteroseismology data is released, the team plans to evaluate them to see if they contain hints as possible Hawking stars. The team considered one more scenario that's very interesting. If the accretion is relatively inefficient, less energy is pumped into the upper layers of the sun. So the sun wouldn't expand, even as the black hole grew. The sun would just appear perfectly normal until it suddenly brightens and then vanishes as the black hole consumes it. We would have a little bit of early warning. The timescales of the brightening range anywhere from tens of thousands of years to just a few minutes. Bingo. A huge thanks to my patrons for helping to keep Launchpad Astronomy going, and I'd like to thank Dr. Earl Bellinger for his simulation plots and Cristiano Brandaro for his amazing animations. Be sure to check out Cristiano's YouTube channel if you'd like to see some more of his handiwork. Until next time, stay curious, my friend.